Hello and welcome to another edition of our coverage of election 2022. We're hosting a series of discussions and interviews with candidates who are running for statewide office, and the primary is coming up pretty soon on Tuesday, August 9th. So if you haven't had a chance to do early voting or aren't planning to, that's the day to mark in the calendar to make sure you have a chance to get over to the polls. My name is Andrew McKeever. I'm the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Wednesday, July 13th. Today, it's our pleasure to have in our studio Mermel, who is running for the U.S. Senate seat. He is running in the Republican Party primary for the nomination of that party to run in the November election. That's the seat, of course, that kind of opened up with the retirement of incumbent Senator Patrick Leahy. And we have several candidates who are in the mix. Two other Republican candidates are in the primary. We will have a chance to talk to both of them. And the winner, of course, will go on to face the winner of the Democratic Party nominee in the November general election. Mr. Mermel is a resident of Manchester, and it's always good to have one of the locals here for one of these conversations. He has a 35-year career in real estate finance in New York City, and prior to that career in finance, he was a White House intern under Vice President George H.W. Bush while he was attending the University of Vermont. He also served as the National Finance Chair for Governor Michael Huckabee's 2008 presidential run. That's when Governor Huckabee was the governor of Arkansas. And he was also the New York State Grassroots Chair for Senator John McCain's presidential campaign in 2008. Again, Mr. Mermel, welcome to the News Project. Great to have you here with us today. Really appreciate you making the time for this conversation. And I guess I thought we could just start by having you tell us what prompted you to run for the Senate this year. Was there some particular set of issues that you felt strongly about, that you felt this is the year I need to throw my hat in the ring and make my voice heard?
I did. But first I'd like to thank you and the station for having me on, and also for interviewing other candidates as well. I think it's important, especially in a small state like Vermont, to let people see the candidates and see what they stand for and make their own decisions. And getting out to voters is not easy in Vermont all the time. And I think the station plays an important role in doing that. So thank you as a citizen. I did not expect to run. And in fact, in January, when I talked to the state party, it seemed as if they were very satisfied that they had a candidate who was, a pro-business, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment candidate that would be appealing to Republican voters and give them a choice. And as I started to look at the campaigns of my opponents, Nolan and Malloy, I noticed that there wasn't anybody that was representing the voice of Vermonters, low and moderate income Vermonters, talking about the economy. I'm a business person. I think the number one issue this season, this cycle, is the economy and its crushing effects on voters. As you know, this morning, inflation was announced at being over 9%. In terms of a CPI increase. If you can imagine on a monthly basis having which all Vermonters are doing, and they're all paying 10% more, let's say, on average, for their ordinary household goods, for their food, and obviously there's been a spike in some items like gasoline. And that's put them under tremendous pressure, and it's not sustainable. The Senate, a senator has the ability to affect the national economy. And I have a plan to change the national economy so that Vermonters can be more prosperous. One of the sad things of these liberal policies that we've lived under with the progressives is that our average statewide income is $59,000, but the regional average is $76,000. So there's really no reason we should be at a $17,000 loss to people in New Hampshire and other states. I mean, ideally, I'd like to give everybody in Vermont a $17,000 raise, because unfortunately, I believe these repressive policies have really held people back. They've been anti-growth, anti-business. I want to bring businesses to Vermont. I want to make Vermont more prosperous.
Well, let's start drilling down through some of those issues then. On your website, you mentioned that you want to stop inflation by curtailing excessive spending.
Right.
And I guess I just was wondering, what kind of spending do you consider excessive?
Well, I think we saw during the pandemic and the COVID spending, a lot of it was excessive. It's actually removed people from the job market. I think that's why we're seeing these issues. We've also seen that a mass accumulation of savings from government subsidies. Some of the spending on PPE to these companies was not necessary. This wasteful spending has pushed our inflationary pressures, and that needs to stop. That's not to say that all government spending is wasteful. It's not. I mean, a lot of it's very needed, and for instance, in a state that is not wealthy like Vermont, we depend on that federal spending coming back. That's another issue that I feel very strongly about, is that we deserve the appropriations that are commensurate with any other state. And this past year, Senator Richard Shelby of Alabama was able to secure $650 million for his state. But Senator Leahy only secured $162 million, and Senator Leahy was in charge. So the way I look at it, he left $488 million on the, I know you're frowning at me because you're saying, how did that happen? And I didn't hear about it. Well, it did happen, and Shelby is a Republican from Alabama, and Senator Leahy was in charge, right? Had I been in that position, I would have made sure we got at least $650, right, if not more, for being in charge.
Of the Senate Appropriations Committee.
Yeah, from these appropriations, and $488 million. There are massive needs here on a social basis, right, for mental health, for social services, to combat hunger. I mean, there are all kinds of social needs in Vermont that 488 could have addressed. So I'm not against that. I think part of what Vermont needs, I once heard that Mitch McConnell said kind of a nasty thing against Vermont, was that, and he's a big donor, my opponent, he said that Vermont was West Virginia without churches, which I thought was pretty nasty. But that's why we need to change it at Senate leadership as well. But we do need the involvement of the federal government here to make sure that we can function properly, and we need our federal representatives to produce that. Peter Welsh, for instance, if the average appropriation per member was 18 million, Peter Welsh only brought back 8 million. Right, that's a failing grade, right? When I was at UVM, maybe not when you were there, but when I was there, you got to get at least 70%. And I can't understand why in a Democrat Congress, why he didn't bring back more money. So that's a piece of it. But I think there are also levers that we can pull to bring businesses in. So the money that we have, some of it we're wasting. So we're spending money on broadband. We're allocating 500, and this is a hot issue with me because we're at a competitive disadvantage to other states because of broadband. And we've been talking for a decade about how we're going to get broadband. And we have $550 million allocated to a fiber network across the state. And that's Peter Welsh's signature accomplishment over his 40 years of service. And this is a very backwards-looking technology, fiber. It's kind of yesterday's answer to broadband. Today's solution is low Earth orbiting satellites, known as Starlink, which is run by Elon Musk. So Vermont currently is spending $550 million to dig a ditch to every person's house in the state. And what I'm saying is we're wasting our money. And rather than wasting our money on ditches, we should be applying that to broadband. So my idea is to take that $550 million and make a deal immediately with Starlink. And because Starlink will have that money, actually it would pay for service for all of us for 2 to 3 years. So it makes me sound like I'm to the left of Bernie Sanders when I say we should have free broadband service. But my argument is we're wasting our money digging ditches. And what would you prefer, a free ditch or free service?
Well, I'm curious because my understanding of that is that the fiber optic cable currently being laid here in Benton County and across the state it will enable very fast upload and download speeds, 100 megabits per second, which is way beyond what is considered an average. I think it's 25 and 3 is the federal standard at the moment. Why would we want to make Elon Musk, who's already a fairly wealthy guy, even more rich by buying into his system when there's a perfectly good fiber optic system that would be more than adequate for several decades?
Well, I think you're conflating a lot of things there, and let me unpack what you said. His system is not more expensive than current fiber costs. And I mean, these costs for broadband are very expensive and hit everyone equally and hold back students, small businesses, larger businesses. The idea that fiber is readily available is not true. It will take somewhere between 5 and 10 years to roll the system out. Starlink provided immediate service to Ukraine. I'm not against Elon Musk making money if he can provide a service and he can do something good. There's a competitive service called Kuiper, which would also be applicable. I think at the very base of it, if you really think about public utility, I mean, broadband is a public utility. Why is it different than, it is the Library of Alexandria, right? It has all the information that a person would want. And I remember how important Carnegie libraries were to small towns that many Vermont towns have benefited from. Access to the internet is, a Carnegie library. And should the government, be providing that? Yeah. If Elon Musk in his spare time can come up with a satellite system that's much better than anything we have now, I'm sure the U.S. government, if they put their mind to it, could do the same thing. So ultimately, I'd like to see the government there. But in the meantime, it's just not possible to do work from Vermont. And I can't tell you the number of people. So there's a structural change going on about work from home. And in terms of return to work percentages, as I talk to people on Wall Street and across financial services and across the economy and in New York and Boston, they don't expect a return to work to be more than 60%. They're currently at 40% right now. So that means there are 40% of those employees are free, right, to relocate anywhere they want. And Vermont is a very attractive place. But I've heard from many of them that they can't get broadband service, so they can't do their jobs. They can't even dig their own ditches immediately, right? I know one lady from American Express who had to spend $25,000 just to get service. And we can't expect that to happen. We could capitalize, if we could provide broadband quickly, we could get these work from home people that could lower our tax base. Wouldn't that be nice, right? Part of the issue in Vermont, which is anti-growth, is that our tax base is so high.
So what should the state be doing more than it's already doing to attract businesses? That's been...
I didn't know they were doing anything, in fairness. This $10,000 grant is very hard to obtain. If you've actually gone through the process to see if you could actually qualify for it, they're not pursuing businesses. As you know, there's a massive structural exodus from the New England states. Florida just has 4 new districts, electoral districts, because people from New England moved to Florida. They're not being competitive. And broadband and other basic fundamentals are important to that. So as a follow-up on the Elon Musk thing, he does control Tesla. We are the Green Mountain state. We should have green jobs, right? If we were able to make a deal with him for $500 million, obviously then we would twist his arm to bring Tesla operations or Starlink operations here, right? We should have those type of jobs here. There's another thing that's going on that we should qualify, which is a microchip fabrication plant. Currently, there's about $10 to $15 billion being invested by the federal government in Albany, not far from our border. $15 billion, that's double the size of our state budget. There's a total of $52 billion available under the Competes Act, which has passed both the House and Senate, to build these fabrication plants. None of our federal representatives have gone after that fabrication plant. That's a $2 to $8 billion investment, and we have the labor here that would be qualified to do it in the southern part of the state as well as the northern part of the state. And one of my first initiatives, obviously, if I were elected, would be to go get those jobs.
And do you think the current incumbents have not been aggressive enough towards going after those opportunities to bring those kinds of businesses like the microchip factory?
I think the results speak for themselves, right? As I've been saying, the progressive agenda has not helped Vermont. Are we better off than we were 2 years ago? Are we better off than we were 4 years ago? We haven't been, right? We're not. And so what I'm suggesting is, please send me to Congress. Please send me to the Senate. Let's have a balance on the federal ticket, right? We have Senator Sanders there, who's a Vermont icon, right? If we send Becca Balint, who's leading in the polls, right, and then we put Peter Welch back, it'll be 3 progressive votes, right? None of which will represent Vermonters, right? There should be somebody talking about the issues of the economy, but then also crime. Peter Welch has voted to defund the police 3 times. And I published an article today in True North Reports as an op-ed about qualified immunity. And under Act 254, if you remember it, and I'm sure you probably do, it calls for a study of the deletion of qualified immunity. But that's the summary. So I went back to the actual text as enacted. And as you know, I have a degree in theology from Yale, so I've spent a lot of time reading texts. And it's amazing once you start reading what the actual laws say. I know that it's kind of been out of favor for lawmakers to read the actual laws, but that's something I would commit to do. I would not vote for a law that I had not read. But looking at Act 254, it looks at the issue of qualified immunity from the perspective of the perpetrator and the ability of individuals to obtain access to civil justice remedies. Right? Is qualified immunity an obstacle to civil justice remedies? And I don't think that's the right way to look at it. And it brings up this philosophy of restorative justice, that the police department is fundamentally racist and cannot be reformed. And so and in Act 254, they have the Center for Justice out of Vermont Law School actually writing the report for the legislative committee, and that report, I will bet you $1 to donuts, is going to recommend removal of qualified immunity. And the removal of qualified immunity, it's basically the protection of the police from frivolous lawsuits, and the police will be destroyed by these lawsuits. The Vermont Police Association of Police Chiefs, who I'm actually talking with on Friday, has predicted that 50%, and if you talk to your local policeman, you'll find this to be true, 50% of the force will quit. So that means that the experienced members, the members of the forces that mentor the younger people are leaving. And when that happens in November, that will be a huge public safety risk for the population of Vermont.
Well, the Vermont legislature this past session declined to go forward with a qualified immunity bill.
What I'm saying is...
You're speaking on the federal level.
No, I'm talking about at the state level.
Right. They shot it down this past year.
If you read what was enacted, it's not a shot down. It's we'll put it behind the elections, and then we're going to ram it through. So,
or create a study commission.
Well, no, but I'm saying the way the charge that the study has been given, they can only come to one conclusion. The way that they're looking at it, they're not looking at the value of qualified immunity. They're looking at access to justice. And this restorative philosophy, I understand the restorative justice philosophy tree, trying to heal the community and the perpetrator. But, there hasn't been a corresponding increase in mental health dollars. And that's something I want to see for public safety. We've got to commit more money for public health, and that's not being done. We also have to, commit by our heritage and our traditions on the Second Amendment. I'm very strong on the Second Amendment. And there are a lot of people who feel that gun control measures can change things, can stop these horrible incidents from happening. But knowing New York City and Chicago and Los Angeles, when I was in clergy training at Yale, I spent a summer with clergy in the 67th precinct of Brooklyn. And the clergy there intermediate actions between gun violence in the community and the police, because there's such friction. So whenever there's an instance of gun violence, right, they show up as clergy and try to calm the waters to get them to talk to each other. So my point is, in Brooklyn, every other day there's someone getting shot, and they have some of the most restrictive gun laws. You don't hear about it. It's not reported on. I mean, you have to be in the community, and it happens in Brooklyn all the time. And it's very sad, and unfortunately, gun control won't help us. We've already had 16 instances of gun violence in Burlington, right? And Burlington has been defunded. Right now, they've lost 40% of their officers, and it affects our communities. I want to make this very clear to your viewership. When Burlington loses officers, or any other city loses officers, the Vermont State Troopers fill in. And when the Vermont State Troopers fill in, then there's less Vermont State Troopers to cover everybody else. And so when Burlington isn't able to meet its obligations to protect its public, they call upon these troopers, and then we're left stranded because we have less troopers to serve us. So this crime issue is a statewide issue that has to be addressed holistically, and that's why I want to bring as many resources to the police departments as possible. I think restorative justice is a very good add-on, adding these social workers. Yeah, there is something to this idea of a carceral state, right? That people are locked in this cycle of violence and cycle of imprisonment. And how do we break that apart, right? And social work and analysis of that system is useful, but we can't put the public at risk while we do this. And some of their ideas about not prosecuting criminals just doesn't work. These people are back out on the streets and they're committing more crimes. There were crimes here in Manchester over the past year, crimes that I witnessed or was a victim of, where the police just don't have the resources to come out. They've been so swamped with the homeless people or the people in the judicial system that need housing this is from them, right, from Rutland and Burlington that are in our hotels and motels. They don't have time to respond to burglaries and carjackings are up, assaults are up. One of the issues is that DOJ is not reporting our crimes on a statewide basis. I wrote another op-ed about this, and I don't know why Christina Nolan did nothing to fix this, but the DOJ has got to give us crime information on a statewide basis so we can address it like Chief Bratton did in New York City.
Would you be in favor of an assault weapons ban as part of an overall package to reduce gun violence and improve gun safety?
No, I wouldn't. I'm in
Why
favor.
not?
I don't think it would improve gun safety.
I mean,
there are
because
400
there's
million.
been a lot of emphasis placed recently on mental health services for some of the folks who've been charged with the violence that we've seen recently in Buffalo and Uvalde and more recently in Highland Park. But the fact that assault rifles are so readily available seems to be a big contributing factor, and it's always puzzled me as to why that's been so difficult to find a compromise around banning those in exchange for law-abiding citizens to own rifles and shotguns for recreational purposes.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying. I think you pointed out the weakness of your own argument is that there are 400 million guns now, right? And this assault rifle, however it's defined, right, it's not possible to remove those. And this idea that we can wave a magic wand with legislation and make all these problems go away just won't work. And what I'm suggesting is we really have to do the hard work of doing mental health care and concern, right? We need to I've been hearing from Vermont agencies, they're just not getting the money. So my priority would be to fund them so that we can do that. We also need to make sure that the police have the resources to be aware of these people and have the resources to cover them. They don't now. I know that for a fact. I also believe that the Second Amendment is a constitutionally guaranteed right. I believe in the Constitution, and I believe certainly if qualified immunity goes forward, as I believe it will under the progressives, there could be a squeeze play, right? You're going to lose your police, and then they're also going to attack Second Amendment rights at the federal level. So your ability to protect yourself will get less, and I don't want to see that happen.
We could have a long discussion about the Second Amendment, which I've studied extensively and have a very different understanding, I think, from many people. But we only have a few minutes left, so I did want to move on just to kind of talk about a few other things here. Climate change is one I don't think we sort of touched upon a little bit, but wanted to hear a little bit more about what you thought the state could be doing or the federal government could be doing. It's interesting to me at a time where gas prices are historically at very high levels, that we're not seizing this moment to maybe supercharge an effort to encourage more people to buy electric vehicles. And I realize there are all kinds of supply chain issues going on, and parts and vehicles are in short supply. But it seemed like this is an opportunity to almost try to say, hey, rather than going to Saudi Arabia and saying, hey, please drill more oil, why don't we invest more in making those cars more lower the price through a tax credit perhaps, or doing what we can to invest in that infrastructure. But that's one part of climate change, and I'm sure you have thoughts on the whole spectrum of that. So,
well, with respect, I think the idea of choosing between using fossil fuels and then having electric cars is a false choice. There aren't enough electric cars at a cheap price to replace what we need, and we rely on fossil fuels to supply our economy. Fossil fuels are in our items, in some of our goods. The price of gasoline and oil is what's driving up the inflation in all these other sectors. In food, food prices are out of control. So I don't know if you try to buy bacon or eggs or compared to what they used to be, but they're expensive. So I do believe climate change is an issue we need to address. And what I've been saying is I've been very disappointed. We need to make large gains in reduction of carbon emissions. And I know the state has been very focused on its own residents, but Vermont is not the problem in climate change. China and India are the problem. And at a federal level, what I want to do is advance measures against China to cut back on their emissions. They emit more carbon gases in China than all developed countries combined. One company in China emits more gases than the country of Canada. So no one has stood up to China on these carbon emissions, and that's something that I want to accomplish. And at the federal level, that's something that can be done. I'm not beholden to China, and I very much want to see America prosper, but China's building 10 to 12 coal plants this year, right? And that's the other hidden issue behind the move to green cars is that means in order to, even if we could make the green cars appear at a reasonable price, we don't have the capacity in the energy sector to make the electricity to fuel the cars, so we'd have to burn more coal. So these are not simple answers. And I think Vermonters want to have somebody who's dedicated to finding the solution, working across the aisle to get to that solution. That's something I certainly want to do on climate change. I mean, the traditional Republicans have not been open to that, and I'd be very open to that. Environmentalism is a strong part of who I am. When I first came to UVM, I was a botany major before I became an English major, and the science was pretty tough in botany, I'll give you that. It's a lot easier in English.
That's another thing we could have a long talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Real quick though, before we have to run, this November the state's going to vote on Proposition 5 on amending the state constitution on reproductive rights. I just wondered if you could give us your feeling about that whole issue, of course, growing out of the Supreme Court's recent decision that overturned Roe v. Wade.
Right. I think the idea of federalism is a good idea, right? That this wasn't enshrined in the Constitution. It should go back to the states. I know there's concern that other states are suffering because they don't have the rights that Vermonters have. Vermont is the most pro-choice state in the union, according to Pew Research, I think tying Massachusetts, right? I have no doubt that Prop 5 will pass because there's a lot of enthusiasm behind it, and it will likely become an amendment. What I've said is I'm personally pro-life. As a Christian, as a Methodist, I'm pro-life, but I will not stand before the will of the people in enacting the laws that they want. And this plebiscite, Prop 5, is direct democracy, right? People are going to vote, right? And I'm not going to impose my moral, theological, or spiritual views on them, much as I do not want people imposing their views on others.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for today. I think we could probably have talk for another half an hour about these and many other issues. But anyway, Myers Mermel is a candidate for the U.S. Senate in the Republican Party's primary. The primary, of course, is going to be held on August 9th, but you can vote early if you are not going to be in town that day. Go to the town clerk's office and you can get a ballot, or go to the Secretary of State's website and request one through there on my voter page. Again, Mr. Mermel is one of 3 candidates who's running in the primary, and well, we'll see what happens.
We will.
Maybe we'll have another opportunity to have you back for another discussion this fall.
I look forward to it.
That would be great. All right, well, thanks again for being with us today, and well, we'll see you again the next time. We still have a few more candidates to talk with, so we're not done yet, but we're getting there. All right, thanks again very much for being with us.